Welcome to this webinar for potential applicants for the STARTALK 2020 application cycle. My name is Thomas Dow and I work at the National Foreign Language Center for the STARTALK program. We're excited you're here today. We have several things planned. There'll be a short presentation in the beginning, kind of going over some of the narrative questions of the proposal process, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Right now, everybody is muted. But just to make sure you can hear me, could you all use the little chat box and say, raise your hand, or let me know that you can hear me indeed? Excellent. Okay, so thank you for joining us. As you know, probably STARTALK is a federal grant program funded by the National Security Agency and administered by the National Foreign Language Center at the University of Maryland. We like to start every one of these kind of webinars by reminding potential applicants of the 3 program goals that STARTALK has. Number 1 is to stimulate significant increases in the number of students enrolled in the study of critical languages. Number 2 is to increase the quality and supply of teachers of critical languages throughout the nation. And number 3, improving the quality and effectiveness of critical language curriculum. This webinar targets goal number 2, teacher programs. All of our programs are guided by the STARTALK principles for effective teaching and learning that you can see on your screen now. The purpose of this webinar is not to go into detail into those principles. If you're new to the STARTALK family, I invite you to search on our website for materials that explain the STARTALK principles. And if you are a returning program, you are very familiar with those principles. If it helps you to move along this webinar a little better, we'll be going over 2 PDF documents, the proposal narrative guide for teacher programs and the proposal narrative guide for practicum programs, which are found on the STARTALK website for Applicant Resources. And you can see the URL here. There are other parts to the application that we'll not be covering today. However, I will share with you some details about future webinars that provide answers for technical questions and also other ways of contacting and reaching STARTALK. STARTALK is seeking applications this year for 5 different types of programs: student programs, overview teacher programs, focus teacher programs, demonstration teacher programs, and practicum teacher programs. This is a change in the past when we were seeking only student, teacher programs as well as combined programs. And I hope that during today's webinar, I'll be able to explain differences between those 4 different teacher program types so that you can make a decision about which one you might want to apply for the summer of 2020. So let's dig into each of those program types. What is the purpose of each program? An overview program provides participants with opportunities to understand and explain the role of selected key concepts for effective language teaching. A focus program provides participants with opportunities to plan for implementation of selected key concepts for effective language teaching. A demonstration program provides participants with opportunities to plan and implement key concepts in highly structured peer and micro-teaching experiences. And a practicum program provides participants opportunities to plan and implement key concepts in a direct teaching experience in a connected student program. Here are a couple more points for each of those program types. What will participants actually do? Well, in an overview program, they will compare their current practices to what they're learning and will reflect on how their practices might change. In a focus program, participants will develop actual materials and resources to plan for implementation, things they can take to their own classroom environment and start using once the STARTALK program is over. In a demonstration program, participants will develop learning plans, activities, and other resources and have opportunities to implement the developed materials. So they will not only just prepare them, but they will also implement them in a micro peer teaching environment. And in a practicum program, participants will actually teach, meaning they will implement their new learning while teaching in a connected STARTALK student program. Another way of looking at these 4 program types, which are designed to create a sequence of programs to allow those participants who attend multiple programs in a year over a course of multiple years to truly create a sequence of programs that leads them from an introduction for the overall program, a planning and the focus program, an opportunity to practice in the demonstration program, and actually implement in our practicum programs. So overview programs truly are just an introduction, a broad overview, as the word is saying, kind of a snapshot of some of the most important things that STARTALK believes effective teachers do. Focus program can be for all kinds of things, depending on what you want to focus on with your teachers. We envision that there could be programs that focus on just assessment. There could be program focused just on a particular aspect of lesson planning. There could be a focus on a particular strategy even, or another particular aspect of teaching. In the demonstration program, teachers will not only focus on one of these things, but they will also try them out, have an opportunity to try them out either in peer teaching or micro teaching. And then in the practicum program, those teachers will truly teach in a student program. Now, I know one of the questions that our training programs have already been asking, so I will go ahead and get it out of the way, is which program am I? And we can't answer that question for you. In fact, we would encourage you to not even think about what you have done in the past, but think about what you like to do in the future. Which one of these program types would best serve the needs of the participants in your area? Let's dig deeper into the actual structure of the narrative section of your proposal. Before you get there, you'll have to fill out some program information, some metadata, some biographical information. But the heart of your proposal truly is the narrative portion of the program, and it's divided as follows. Program participants, who are the participants and how will their needs be identified? Your program goals, what are the major learning outcomes for the program? Program assessment, how will you measure participants' growth in the program? Program implementation, program personnel, who's actually going to lead your program and teach the participants. And finally, the program summary. And we will look at some of these questions in more detail in just a second. Under each of the sections, you'll find a series of questions. It is important to remember that the questions are actually based on the program information. So some applicants will get different questions based on the information you have provided in the program information section. This is particularly true for those programs who are returning programs or programs who are providing online and hybrid experiences. So it's important that you complete the program information section before moving on to the narrative part of the program application, because you'll get different questions. In the narrative guide, you will, and as well as in the online system, you'll find a series of hints for each question. It's important to remember that those hints are just examples. They're not an exhaustive list, but just some ideas of what type of program we're looking for. But they also are part of the review criteria that are being used when your application will be reviewed by external reviewers. So it's a good idea to truly review those hints when answering the question for your proposal. And then, of course, finally, you get to write your response. Put a reminder, each response is limited to 3,000 characters, which is about 500 words each. And then the most important advice I can give you is when you write your response, we are not looking for, this is not an assessment of your understanding of world language teaching. We are not looking for a series of buzzwords, but we are looking for you to draw us a picture. The reviewers are looking to see, what will this program look like? Sure, we would like to know that you do have some basic understanding of key concepts, but the more you can explain, the more you can use language that will outline in a way that provides details to the reviewer, the better your responses will be rated. So think about drawing a picture for each one of those questions. Let's dig into some of these questions. I have not included every single question here, but some of the key questions that most programs either struggle with in the application, or also that I wanted to share some additional information. There are additional questions in your narrative guide. Some of those don't apply to all programs, so we are not included in today's webinar. The first question, describe the participants you're hoping to enroll in your program, including their qualifications, background, knowledge, needs, etc. Probably one of the most important questions, because we do want to know who they are. More important than ever before, because who they are will determine also the program type that you have chosen, and we'll be looking to make sure that the type of program that you're applying for actually matches the needs of the participants that you are saying you will have in your program. The second question for participants then addresses the different needs and backgrounds of your participants, and what kind of structures do you have in place to measure that? And how will you ensure that every one of your participants are able to grow as a result of their participation? The next section is the program goals section. In that section, you will identify which criteria from the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning framework will be the focus of your program. For our returning programs, you are familiar with this framework. For applicants applying for the very first time, this framework is another project of the National Foreign Language Center, and it outlines what effective teachers do. In order for everyone to answer this question correctly this year, allow me to give you a couple definitions. The framework was updated for 2019, and it's now built into SOPHY. SOPHY is the online application system. So when you get to that question, you don't have to type, you don't have to cut and paste. You will actually be able to just click, pick, and choose which one of the TEL criteria will be the goal for your program. And we will talk about how many and which domains in just a second. Before we talk about that, you need to understand though what each of those different categories mean so you can click on the right thing. So the framework is made up of 7 domains. A domain is a group of criteria to describe the characteristics and behaviors of an effective teacher within one aspect of teacher effectiveness. It is driven by an essential question teachers must ask themselves as they grow their effectiveness. TEL criteria is a statement that describes the characteristics of an effective teacher within a domain of the TEL framework. A criterion provides one answer to the essential question of the domain. And the TEL subcriteria are a statement that outlines the behaviors or necessary steps an effective teacher will take to demonstrate they have met a specific criterion. For the program goals section of your application, you will only be identifying TEL criteria, no subcriteria. Now you might ask yourself, which ones, how many? There are specific guidelines for each program type. So let's take a look. If you're applying for an overview program, you'll be asked to identify up to 4 TEL criteria from the planning domain that will help participants develop background knowledge and prepare them for planning of effective language learning. So we're just looking for planning. We're hoping that your participants will build background knowledge. Remember, this is the program type that it's an introduction to language teaching. If you're applying for a focus program, we're going to ask you first to select one of the STARTALK principles that becomes the major focus of your program, and identify up to 2 TEL criteria from the planning domain and up to 2 additional TEL criteria that support the principle you selected. If you're applying for a demonstration program, we're asking you to identify up to 2 TEL criteria from the planning domain and 2 additional TEL criteria from any other domain that provide participants with feedback on their own practices. And if you're applying for a practical program, We're asking you to identify 2 TEL criteria from the learning experience domain, because those participants will be teaching in a student program. So they will have the opportunity to actually get feedback on learning experience criteria. And 2 additional TEL criteria that will provide feedback based on evidence of student learning. I don't want to say any and all, because not all of them do provide you evidence of student learning, but you want to think about, so what else will be the focus of our program? What else will teachers be doing that we want to provide them feedback? And will we have evidence in our program based on the student learning that's happening? Let's move to the program assessment section. They will describe the evidence you'll collect to show that each participant has met the major goals of the program. And you'll be asked to include an example for each one of the TEL criteria that you identified before. The program implementation section is probably a section that is most different for each program type. So while we have fairly similar goals, and even the assessment probably will be very similar, just depending on what kind of program type you are, but the implementation questions are different. So let's start. For overview and focus program, you will begin by describing learning experiences you design to allow participants to acquire new knowledge. So how will they get the new ideas? In a demonstration program, we're hoping you will describe learning experiences you will design to allow participants the opportunity to gain insights into their teaching practices. And the practicum program, of course, we're looking for ways that you will prepare participants to actually teach in the student program. It is the ultimate professional development experience. The next question in the program implementation section, you'll be describing opportunities that you're providing up participants to demonstrate their understanding of new knowledge. In the case of the focus program, it's new knowledge and skills. So you can already see a difference there. Again, overview program is just an introduction. We're just looking for knowledge here. Whereas in the focus program, we're beginning to look for skill application. In the demonstration program, we would like you to describe the type of peer or micro-teaching experiences that you're planning for your participants. And if you are applying for a practicum program, this is the opportunity for you to describe exactly what responsibilities will the teachers have in the student program. And I said earlier, the description is I believe it's a major teaching responsibility or direct teaching responsibility in the student program. We've received several programs. The easiest way I can answer that is when you ask your students, who is your teacher? They should be able to identify your teacher participants before they identify anybody else in the program who might have instructional responsibilities. It doesn't mean that there aren't other teachers in the room. We are encouraging you to think and consider ways of using mentor teachers that can support those teachers, especially as the student program starts. But your teacher participants should be the main teachers. The next set of questions deals with feedback. In an overview program, how will they receive feedback on their work? In a focus program, how will they receive feedback on so that they're ready to actually use those things? In a overview program, we're not looking for them to actually change the world, they change their teaching world yet. They might not even be teaching it. They might be pre-service teachers. But in the focus program, we're expecting those to be practicing teachers, and you help them through your program prepare some new materials and resources that they should be able to transfer into their classroom once their STARTALK program is over. So what feedback will they get to actually ensure that this transfer happens? In a demonstration program, of course, they'll get feedback, and we were looking for innovative ideas for these processes for feedback in the micro and peer teaching environments. And then for the practicum program, we're looking for ways of how will you use evidence of student learning to reflect on the participants' instruction. Of course, ask you to identify the program personnel. A program director and instructional lead are required, and then the rest of your instructional team. An important reminder here, this question asks you to identify the experiences and qualifications and match them with the responsibilities. We are not looking for CVs here. We're not looking for long bios, but we are looking for a true match. This program director is responsible for XYZ, and they're qualified for that because they have experience doing XYZ. And you'll be able to create a chart for every one of those responsibilities. So please do not copy CVs, please do not copy bios, but truly give the reviewers a background on why this person is best qualified to lead your program. And a very important question, but often overlooked by applicants, is the program summary. We're asking you to write a program summary of no longer than 5 sentences, and you can see the details that we're looking for. This summary is shared with the National Security Agency, the funder of the program, and keep in mind it is shared with people who have not read the rest of your proposal. So this is your 5-sentence shot at convincing somebody else to say, yes, this is a great program and we should be funding this program. So again, this is a kind of an executive summary, and it's given to people who have not read the rest of your proposal. I want to remind you of a couple additional applicant resources that are available on the website, as you can see on the screen. There you'll find the applicant guide, which kind of walks you through every single part of the application. The different narrative guides, in this case for the teacher programs, we have one for overview, focus, and demonstration, and a separate narrative guide for the practical program. You'll find the budget guide, including several sample budgets, and a series of frequently asked questions for every one of those documents is included as well. Now, as we transition to the question and answer phase of this webinar, I want to give you an opportunity, I want to share a couple of other opportunities where you can ask questions as well. We will have 2 technical webinars a little bit later in October, one on October 7th and one on October 16th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Those where we have staff available to ask, for you to be able to ask truly technical questions. Where do I enter this? I'm having trouble entering this year. Where should this go? My budget doesn't work, or any other question that you have that might be technical, but not part of the narrative questions. On the website, the URL you see on the screen, there's a section where you can submit application questions, and we constantly review them, and we'll try to respond to them within 24 hours. And if they get asked more than once, we will also add those responses to the frequently asked question section. So I highly encourage you to always review the frequently asked question section first, because if you have that question, likely somebody else will have the question as well, and we keep updating those as the questions come in. And then finally, if you have already started on your application in the online system and you need technical support right now, you can send an email to this address, or during regular business hours, which is 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, you can call this number, and those hours increase as the number is staffed longer as we get closer to the application deadline. Okay, so I am done with my part, and now it is my hope that I can also answer questions for you. I can figure out how to get back to my menu. Give me 1 second. Okay, so if you have any questions, all right, then you can zip in. There's a button in the very depends which version you're using, and sometimes the bottom, sometimes the top, called Q&A, and you can submit your answer there. And you can submit your question there, and I will try to answer. First question is, will there be a chance to submit an application for a preliminary review? Unfortunately, that is not possible, no. However, you do have 2 opportunities to ask questions. Next question is, what is the expected duration of the program? That really depends on the program type, and there are no guidelines really. It depends on your program type, it depends on your program goal, on your program participants. So we are looking for an innovative different program. I would expect that overview programs be shorter than, say, practicum programs, and everything else in between. Next question is, what is the difference between teacher demonstration program and practicum teacher program? If the participants are not receiving college credit, then the teacher demonstration program should be considered. Not necessarily. Don't think that practicum is just a college credit or part of certification. That's just the name we chose for this type of program. The biggest difference is that in the practicum program, the participants will have a true opportunity to teach in a student program. They'll be teaching multiple hours a day, whereas in a demonstration program, it might be just a very short demo of 10-15 minutes, either in front of their peers or some other way you have access to students, perhaps because you're located next to another summer program that's not a STARTALK program, and you can provide some kind of language instruction for an hour. So yeah, there's a big difference between the amount of teaching and the amount of implementation that the participants will have. Does the instructional lead and the project director both need to attend the conferences? Yes, that is a requirement for all grants. The teacher program is not necessary to qualify for the student program. Yes, you can certainly, you don't have, there's not an email address. The question is, can you email questions? I showed you earlier the email address, and I can go back to that for technical question, but for content question, there's a form on the website where you can submit the questions, and it will go to the right person that can answer it. Next question comes from Isaac. I'm applying for a STARTALK program for the first time. I want to listen to the teacher program webinar and the student webinar before making a decision about which program to apply for implementing. Do you suggest doing the student program first? Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I like them both. I've done them both so many times. I don't know. I think that really just depends on what you're interested in, teacher training or providing students the opportunity to learn language. So, next question comes from Catherine. We're applying for the demonstration program. We had planned initially to focus on 2 STARTALK principles, but we're now wondering if we should change the focus only to the 2 TEL planning criteria we have identified. 2 TEL planning criteria that support the STARTALK principles we're planning to focus on, but should we remove the focus from the STARTALK principle in our narrative and only focus on TEL? No, you can talk about STARTALK principles in the narrative. You just won't be able to identify them as part of the actual goals, which you'll use later to develop your curriculum. But certainly, demonstrating understanding of the STARTALK principle is always a good thing in any one of those answers. Another anonymous question, for the practicum program, what is the expected maximum number of teacher participants? The answer is true for any program, any teacher program. We do not have any guidelines about how many teachers you're planning to enroll. That's all a local decision depending on who your participants are and what your budget is. Another question about travel from Fernando. Is travel and accommodation for teachers covered by the grant? Before I say something wrong, I know there's an answer to this in the frequently asked questions or in the budget guide, I believe. It's not that you can directly support them. I believe you can provide them with a travel stipend, but let me check on that for you again. Question from Lena, we want to have an overview program. Can teacher participants come to our student program to observe the teaching as part of their learning. So I'm assuming you would have one overview program and a separate student program. That is certainly possible, yes. Of course, we always recommend for people to not count on both programs being funded. So you want to write your proposal in a way that you can still implement both of them if one or the other is not funded. A question about project director, instructional lead. Can they be from different schools? Yes, they can. And we have a couple of more questions. Question from Christina. We submitted an application last year, but we're not selected for the grant. Are we permitted to use the same application, polish it up, and resubmit? For teacher programs, that's not possible because the questions are truly different. For student programs, yes. Any budget guidelines webinars? No. However, you can, in the submit questions field, there is a budget category. And so you can just submit your questions there and you'll get an answer pretty quickly from one of our staff members. All right, questions keep coming in. A question from Laura about Spanish students, but allowing for 30% teacher programs for Spanish. The use of, or the being able to provide services for Spanish teachers is still in the pilot phase. And so it's still something we're trying out, and we're working with the funder to see if we can expand that in the future. Another question from Catherine. One of the top planning criteria we're looking at includes both interpersonal and presentational communication, but planning to only focus on the personal. Is this okay? Sure. Yeah, just explain it in your, actually in SOFA you will only be able to pick one and then you can explain that somewhere else in your narrative. A question from Isaac. Is there a specific amount for the stipends that you offer to teachers participating in the programs? We actually don't offer stipends to participants. They cannot really be paid for their participation. A question from Janine. We plan to use a bus on a daily basis for 4 weeks for the student program, part of the practicum program. Would such expense? Yes, that's certainly an allowable expense. It'll be in the travel section. Question from Steve. If we're planning to do a focus program, should we not be building in any implementation? Correct. Not any implementation in the sense that they will try things out because they won't have access to students, or there's not really any peer teaching, micro teaching, but certainly a planning for implementation in the sense that you want to prepare them in such a way that they can leave your program and everything they developed and created they can use in their own classroom. So it's not one of those programs where, and this is one of the reasons why we develop these 4 program types, because in many startup programs in the past, teachers got a lot of information about lots of stuff and they tried a lot of things, and it was really up to them to figure out, okay, now I have my bag of things, which one I'm actually going to try. What we're hoping by those having the focus programs is that focus programs will provide teachers with very specific opportunities to plan down to the lesson plan level, step-by-step instructions for one particular aspect of teaching, and that will actually prepare them to do that once they return to their classroom. So focus programs really, that word focus really is what it means, and we're trying to get applicants to really focus on smaller aspects of teaching. Another question, can we apply for only the practicum teacher program training without applying for the student program? The potential participants will later teach in their own centers. No, that would not be a possibility. That whole purpose of the practicum program is that that they have the opportunity to teach in a student program. In fact, when you make that selection of practicum in the beginning, you will have to complete 2 narrative sets of questions, one for the teacher side, the teacher training, and one for the student practicum experience. So that would not be doesn't sound like that would be a a program type that would work in your situation. Another question from Steve. If we're doing a focus program, can we pay for teachers to take a course at our university? That is a tricky question. It's more the other way around. A lot of STARTALK programs providing course credit for what's happening in the STARTALK program. You want to make sure that the funds are being used for the activities that you design for the STARTALK program. If they happen to also align with a course at your university, certainly you can provide tuition assistance to your participants, but it can't be that there's a program and then they have to take another course and they're using the STARTALK funds to pay for that course. The STARTALK funds have to be used for the actual STARTALK program that you're designing. There was a lot of questions in a very short amount of time. Check one more spot here. Anybody has another question? I hope I was able to explain some of the difference a little bit. Will we see these questions and answers in the Q&A? Yes, we will take, I will take these questions and we will add them to the FAQ. Give us a couple days. And yes, this webinar is also being recorded. I don't know if it's going to be sent out automatically to participants. That's a really good question. But in the past, we have shared it on the website, so you'll probably see a link to the recording on there. Got another question from Christina. Are there sample approved grants that we can look at as a guide? Unfortunately, that is not a possibility as much as we would like, but we think that if you just look at the hints are full of examples. Again, they're just examples, not an exhaustive list, but it will give you a really good idea of the type of answers we're looking for. I think the tip of the hints and the tip of draw a picture are the two important things to keep in mind when completing your application. Okay, I will keep the Q&A section open for a couple of minutes if anybody has any other questions. Again, if not, that application question section on the resources page is probably the most handy one. You have the option there to submit questions directly to somebody on the STARTALK team. And there's multiple categories. You can ask narrative questions, you can ask budget questions, you can just ask general questions if anything else doesn't fit in any other category, and you'll get an email response. I have another question that says, I didn't, for the practicum program, if we have 4 teachers, do they all need to teach in the student program, or can we pick 1 or 2? No, they all need to teach in the student program. Now, I understand that not everybody might have the same qualifications, and you might not want to release, quote unquote, all of your participants onto the student program. So we are hoping that applicants will design some innovative ways of how to perhaps stagger or rotate or spiral the teaching responsibilities for those teachers. Because of the increased budget amount for a practicum program, which is up to $130,000 for this year, we're also expecting you to budget for mentor teachers that would be in the classroom at all times with the teacher participants. And we're not looking just for 1 mentor teacher for a whole program, but truly 1 for every single classroom that can either perhaps teach more in the beginning of the program, or can intervene if they need to, or can provide instant feedback even between classes, so that no matter the qualifications, no matter the background, every teacher participant has the opportunity to become a teacher in the student program. So it's a pretty intensive program, and it's also a pretty expensive program, hence the higher budget amount. I hope that answers your question. Again, another reminder, there will be 2 additional webinars during which we'll answer technical question in October, be closer to the application deadline. In the meantime, you can submit questions on the website and get email support. Another question from Sarah. If you're applying for a practicum program, do you also need to apply for a student program? No, you do not. Part of the practicum application is also a student program. So I kind of lied, I guess, there. Or my favorite German word, which is yes and no combined, Jein would be the answer. When you select the practicum program in your application, you'll be asked to complete 2 sets of narrative questions. 1 budget, but 2 sets of narrative questions. 1 for the teacher training portion, and those questions we just reviewed, and 1 for the student practicum portion of the program. And those questions would be identical to if you were to apply for just a student program. If you have participated in STARTALK in the past, we used to call this the combination programs, but it's not quite the same. It's similar, but not the same. Okay, we got about 2 minutes, and then I will transition for a moment to the student program webinar, which starts at the top of the hour. Question about demonstration programs. Can be assigned mentor teachers in the teacher demonstration program, and they get paid for each language so they supervise the material. Sure, yeah, that becomes just part of your instructional team. That's possible. There is no longer, question from Lori is, if there's no longer a combination program, that's correct. The combination programs have been evolved into the practicum programs, which has some elements of the combination program, but it's not quite the same. Okay, and this is the last call for questions to be answered live. And I want to thank you for participating in today's webinar. I hope I was able to provide you with some more information. Sometimes it's nice to just have somebody else read it to you than you having to read yourself and trying to figure out what it means. Reminder that there are 3 ways of getting continued support: the webinars in October, submitting an application question on the website, or either emailing or calling Sophie with support question. And I thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we look forward to reviewing your 2020 STARTALK applications.